Well, that would have to be determined by what issue came up. I don't know. I wouldn't know how to answer that.
Is that your answer on that question?
Yeah.
Okay.
The tariffs are good for protecting infant industries. And to tell you the truth, I don't like the idea that we're dealing with a totalitarian society to begin with. Having trade relations with a country that is under a strict totalitarian rule that doesn't allow democracy, all trade with such a country should be conditioned upon for their access to our markets. They should at least be able to introduce reforms that address the human rights condition. They don't have the right to organize over there. We don't have a balanced trading field to deal with when we deal with those type of authoritarian countries. So if they want to deal with our country, if they want to trade and have access to our markets, they should at least agree that at some point down the road, give them some time, some reasonable time, but let's get to the point where at least the workers have a right to say collective bargaining in the workplace, number one. And the other would be, are they meeting environmental standards? If we're going to have trade with that type of country that can cut corners with regard to their working people and with regard to their environmental standards, and yet we in this country, our producers have to meet these standards, then they should be subject to conditions if they want to trade with us. And that's what I have to say about that. Dairy farming per se is a question I would have to look into at the time, okay? But farming in general, I believe in a small family farm. We have a plan for small family farms in the 7th Congressional District. So I can't really speak to what we would do on a statewide level right now without examining it further, but I can tell you this. We have a plan that calls for the creation of mini processing plants throughout the 7th. Hopefully we can get a federal grant for a pilot program. But we have high demand in the 7th for meat products. I did a study years ago, and I found that if we were only to tap 5% of the pork, beef, and chicken demand here within the 7th, that we would be able, for a targeted marketing area with a 75-mile radius, we would be able to actually achieve $250,000 in profit. There is that demand for beef already, but the best beef is farm raised, and people appreciate that. And the thing is, we're not providing that, even though we have acres, maybe thousands of acres of farmland in the 7th district that is going fallow. It's not being productive, and we should be doing something about that. And my plan is to do a feasibility study to determine if it's commercially viable to begin at least tapping part of that high demand market for meat. And then move on from there, if it is successful, to include eggs, well, not eggs, eggs would be probably sought after immediately, but things like produce and other types of high nutrition food. So that would be my plan. As far as the dairy issue, I think they would benefit from that, because we could always, with our plan, advance into dairy too. And if dairy is run by the farmers, okay, and not dictated by outside forces so much, and if they were to tap into our local and regional markets and be a part of that, so my plan would be to look to creating more family farm run businesses, but first of all determine if it's commercially viable, and that would be my position on the farming issue.
Just to clarify the first part of that question, you don't agree with Sonny Perdue that small family farms are going out of business?
Absolutely not. I mean,
Okay.
well, yeah, if you have Republicans in office, they're going to go out of business because they support the corporatizing of agriculture everywhere. And we don't want to end up like Iowa, where they have the Quad Cities down there having terrible problems with their drinking water. And it's just an area we don't want to go into. You cannot concentrate animals and be able to sustain good drinking water, good aquifers, clean rivers and streams, and your ecosystem in general will not survive with that kind of. And your neighbors, what are we going to do with the people whose wells are being subjected to this runoff? We don't have in the state of Wisconsin, to my knowledge, the ability to support you know, these large concentrated animal farm type facilities, because they're not viable given our geology. Our soil is so porous it gets right into our aquifers, and so many people's private wells are connected to aquifers. So,
moving to the next question.
the aging workforce is becoming, I can speak to that because I am a health insurance agent. But in addition to that, when most of the bankruptcies in this country, and certainly in Wisconsin, are due to the fact that people can't afford their health care. And the health care bills are so extensive, and even if you have health insurance, in many cases, you know, you can't afford to pay them.
I'm gonna stop you right there for a minute. We're gonna touch on healthcare in a minute.
Okay.
Specifically, this question is asking about what's your plan to continue to support Wisconsin's low unemployment rate
Okay.
while thinking about the aging workforce. So we're focusing on the economy for this
Yeah.
question.
Well, we know that there may be high employment per se, but look what type of jobs we're talking about. And I don't know that I agree with you that we have a high unemployment rate in the 7th CD that pays good wages. If people are scraping by on some low-paid job, I don't call that living a dignified life. We need to look to that farm policy I was talking about that our campaign is espousing. And that way we can look to building more opportunities to get your family involved in a family farm business itself. So creating new businesses is really the Democrats in this 7th district. That's our objective. And if we can do it by creating more family farms, by taking upon ourselves tapping into markets that are in high demand, that's the way to grow high-paying jobs. And also, we haven't at all tapped the hemp industry potential in this state. I mean, for example, we have a Park Falls situation where there's a lot of layoffs. It seems like they're on a down cycle over there. They're laying off a lot of people. The place may be closing or forced to close again. But have they really looked at the potential for hemp? Hemp produces a variety of products, disposable products that are biodegradable. Countries like at least one country that I know of, Australia, has banned the production of disposable plastic bags. Well, what if it's commercially viable to produce disposable and biodegradable paper bags? That would help our timber industry and our new hemp industry. We need to look into that, find out what's out there on the market that would show us whether or not moving into hemp production, which if we're producing paper products or even baby diapers and that kind of thing that right now are not biodegradable, converting to biodegradable products, it would also help the farm sector of our economy and increase opportunities for people to be active in farming. And if the the feasibility study shows that it is commercially feasible, there are lots of USDA rural development opportunities for us in terms of grants. There's all kinds of ways to raise money and look for investors, but mainly look for a type of commercial or business model that would be run by and for the farmers who produce the goods. Well, we believe in universal health care, and we know that, I mean, it's something that everybody knows. We are not efficient with our health care system as it's currently operated. We know that when you turn to a system that, excuse me. Sorry.
While you're doing that, I'm going to just check the cameras real quick, and then we'll come back and start the question again.
All right.
Doing great.
Thanks.
All right. And again, how do you plan to make healthcare more affordable for the American family?
Well, the most affordable health care would be universal health care. And that means that the people of this country would have to, they would have a right to health care. And we know that from a business standpoint that makes sense, because right now we're paying twice as much for health care. I mean, the people are paying twice as much for health care and are getting little in return and turning to bankruptcies in their sunset years just to cover costs of operations that, it should be a right for, that people, to have health care should be a right for folks. And we know this because the countries that do have, universal health care for their citizens, well, they can provide it at far less cost, half the cost we do, primarily because people in those countries don't wait till they're critically ill to go see a doctor. The more critically ill you are, the more expensive the care is going to be. And now we have a situation where just, if you can't afford to pay it, then they have to increase the rates on everybody else, and then the government has to step in at a higher rate. So we're basically subsidizing a healthcare system in this country already that is for profit, and it's a poor model. It's a model that simply doesn't work. Just like it wouldn't work if we had the post office run by a private party. It's not a viable enterprise for the private sector. We need to nationalize it, and we need to have universal health care for everybody instead of, I see so many people, they work all their life to build up a heritage and estate for their progeny, for the kids and the grandkids, and it's all taken away by these expensive health care bills that they get. I think the debt can be reduced by what we said earlier, having national health care. Raising taxes is out of the question, in my opinion. I know that some people equivocate on that, but I believe in the Warren Plan, which calls for 2% on every dollar over 50 million. That's not going to undermine anybody's standard of living up there in those echelons of income. And they have had the advantage of a democratic system all their lives. They have had the advantage of a fair court system to enforce contracts. That's something, and they've had a great American market from which their wealth is derived. They've also profited from the deindustrialization of this country, whereby they invest in companies that specialize, like Bain Capital and others that you may have heard of in the news, for moving our companies to Mexico and China, a totalitarian country, which I'm strongly against, without conditions. And this is where they have derived their wealth. Now it's time for a little payback because they have pretty well milked us dry. Veteran, and I'll tell you, if I was there helping those people, and they are a democratic people, these are not people who believe in Sharia law. So it disturbs me to no end, and it's a traitorous act, in my opinion, to allow for outside authoritarian state like Turkey to come in and invade a country like the part of Syria that the Kurds hold, destroy the Kurds and slaughter the Kurds after they have helped us destroy the ISIS forces, which would have only turned and may still yet turn their attention to America to wreak havoc here, as they've done all over Europe for the past few years. It's wrong, it's traitorous, and he should be, if for no other reason, impeached on those grounds. Of course, especially expedite the ones that have served our country. But the Dreamers definitely, they had no choice in the decision to come to this country. And I feel that it would be important to give them a path to citizenship. This thing has been going on a long time. But I think all we have to look at here is fair. What's fair? And if they've shown that they have a respect for our laws, which most of them have, that they're looking to educate themselves to be more productive citizens in this country and want to go to college, they shouldn't be denied citizenship after they've taken all those steps. And even if they have simply lived their lives as regular rank and file Americans trying to meet the bills every month, that's commendable because they're trying to take care of their families and be honorable citizens in their communities. First of all, it's not a far left thing to want to, save our environment. It's to be protected and honored. And when you take actions like endorsing fracking, injecting awful chemicals into the groundwater system, emit all the methane in the world, it seems like that has more potential for destroying the atmosphere than any other greenhouse gas. Methane is awful, and yet they persist at doing this instead of going to a non-fossil fuel source. We know through surveys and analysis done by other groups, what comes to mind, I know that the Sierra Club, for example, has done and published studies and also do programs for talking about the conversion to wind energy and solar energy. These are higher paying jobs and safe for the environment, and that's where we need to go, because I think we got about 12 years left, they say, before the tipping point comes with regard to the greenhouse gas effect overwhelming us and undermining the Earth's very sustainability and to the extinction of many fragile species. Absolutely. I mean, that's again, that's a betrayal of I don't know. If you define what is betrayal, okay, it's usually comes back to the point of undermining America's security in some way. And that's exactly what has happened there, with the added punch that he's trying to figure out how to leverage something that's already been approved, like armaments, to protect Ukraine, which is part of our agreement with Ukraine for their dismissal, or not dismissal, but with their agreement to, I guess you would call it, do away with their nuclear arsenal. So in exchange for that, we were able to, agree that yes, we would provide for their security. And now for a president and a commander-in-chief to use that as leverage to, for his own self-dealing, to interfere in our democratic elections is well, it's just beyond the pale. This is outrageous betrayal of trust and his oath of office. Well, of course, you don't want to align yourself with someone who's inviting a foreign power in to slaughter your allies. I mean, of course you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't support a party that, like the Senate of the United States and the Republican members, are supporting the president, and especially in this case in Ukraine, are trying to, make excuses for him. But yeah, you have to align, and it's like the old expression, birds of a feather flock together. And we're not flocking with that flock. I mean, we're not going to be a part of that, and that's why we're running. We oppose that, and it's the thing is, we're Americans. We have a right to express our differences, and we're trying to do it in a civil way. But some things are just beyond belief. When it comes to abandoning allies that have sacrificed, like in northern Syria with the Kurds, who sacrificed 10,000 of their own people to help the forces that America put there to support them, to an invading army from an authoritarian state that almost, like Trump, doesn't have that much respect for democracy, and certainly has no respect for the founding principles upon which our nation was founded. Well, the thing is, we're hoping with this special election that people will put the country before their party. If we accomplish that, or at least start that motion, I think that will be accomplishing a great deal. And that's why I joined this campaign. I was asked to join it. I found out what they wanted to do, and I said, hey, that's what I want to do too. I mean, I think we all have the obligation to set the ship aright. And because right now it's floundering. Our democracy, our democratic principles are being challenged. And anyway, my goal with this campaign is to move in a direction to encourage all Americans to put their allegiance to America before their allegiance for their party.